That's a nice introduction. Thanks so much. We have been doing a presentation based on the findings from this project, the Contract Cheating and Assessment Design Project, since April last year. As soon as we collected the first set of the first data, we had descriptive stats and we tried to get the findings out very quickly to the sector. So I know there's probably half a dozen people or more in the room who've gone to various presentations. I apologize. Except to say, every time we do a presentation, this is probably the 40th different forum where we've been presenting the information. We're really trying to get it out to the sector. Every time we present, we have something different to say. We have a more nuanced understanding of the data. I was just saying to Marina that just this week we submitted a paper to Assessment and Evaluation in Higher Education, which is the next step on from this presentation, looking at the really fine-grained detail right down to discipline and the types of assessment where cheating is occurring. So we're really hopeful that paper will be published this year as well. And of course, there are 2 papers already published that report in depth on the data I'm sharing with you today in Studies in Higher Education. So I'll give you the references at the end. Bretag and Harper in Studies in Higher Ed. So apologies right up front that this is not an original presentation, but I hope there'll be something new for you. The big important thing to note is that Rowena Harper is my project co-leader. She's fantastic. Enough said. She's just the most amazing collaborator ever. And also to acknowledge the OLT. We were very lucky enough to be funded by them before they went down. So I don't know how else to say it until they were defunded. But of course, this is a collaborative project. I am the lead, the project lead with Rowena, but we have a lot of other people who've been contributing, including Kath Ellis, who's on our project, but also Karen Van Haringen from Griffith, Pearl Rosenberg from Sydney, Bill Newton, who's a bit of a contract cheating expert in the UK. We have an amazing data analyst, Michael Burton, and really the nuanced analysis that we have is because of his expertise. I'm an English major, so, you know, about the level of my statistical ability stops at descriptive stats, but we have much more detailed stuff to share with you because of Michael, and we have a great project manager, Sonia Siddiqui. So it really is a team effort. I'm sure all of you are familiar with this timeline over the last 3 years, and I won't belabor the points, except that really the sector started to be very interested and concerned about contract cheating when a student outsources their work to a third party around 2015 because of the My Master scandal, where students had been identified as, many students, hundreds of students, had been identified by the Fairfax media as outsourcing their work to a commercial provider called My Master. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. Most of us in the sector knew that was already happening, didn't quite know what we could do. Around the same time, there was a scandal around fake testaments, parchments, where you could just go online and buy the parchment from your preferred university, and it looked exactly the same with the watermark and the ink and the, you know, everything, the embossing. So that was a real problem. Around this time too, ICAC did an investigation into corruption in higher education. It makes really interesting reading. That also made the press. And as a result of a lot of those scandals, TEXA made a request to all the providers across the sector, but particularly those identified by the My Master scandal, to provide an assurance of academic integrity in relation to those 2 things, contract cheating and the security of data, particularly parchments. But it just didn't stop there. I don't know how many of you saw the SBS Pens for Hire documentary. Nod. Shake your head if you've never heard of that. It's really worth going online to have a look at. It's still there. You can look at it. It's about 20 minutes documentary. Gives you such an insight into why people may engage in contract cheating, where they get somebody else to do their learning for them, all the way through from the beginning, even at enrollment, right through to taking exams for them and their whole degree. But it gives you a lot of insights into why students may have found themselves in that situation. And we also, around that time, since 2016, we were all getting very concerned about fraudulent practices in the vet sector, particularly around ghost students, where recruitment agents were going out into disadvantaged communities and offering things like iPads and computers, marijuana, alcohol to disadvantaged people and saying, here, enroll, and you'll get this lovely prize. And of course, they were ghost students. Those students never benefited in any way, but they did rack up a lovely big HECS debt. And we know that Simon Birmingham has been dealing with that over the last couple of years. We've been worried for some time in the sector about low admission standards, and that's actually covered pretty well in the ICAC report as well, particularly around English language requirements. Last year, there was another scandal where somebody actually blew the whistle to Texas, our national regulator, because they were a professional business writer working for Airtasker, which is an outsourcing freelance outsourcing service. And they were very distressed because they said, we're getting all these students coming to us and asking us to write their assignments. That's not the purpose of Airtasker. And look, you can see I'm running out of space on the slide. There can't be another scandal because there is no more space on my slide. This one was just very recently. EduBirdie, nod if you know about this. EduBirdie, shake your head if you don't. Some shaking. EduBirdie is the absolute classic. It was actually uncovered in the UK, but it spread right around the world. Who has children in the room, like around 10, 11, 12? Yeah, you know, they love YouTube, right? They love watching YouTube. I don't get it, but they especially love watching those people doing those pranks, crazy stuff on YouTube, you know, those pranksters. Well, EduBirdie is a contract cheating site, and they recruited those pranksters on YouTube, those YouTube stars. One of them as young as 12, to, in the middle of their prank, they're doing some crazy stuff, you know, they're jumping over a hula hoop or something, and they say, hey, you want to have fun with me, right? You don't want to spend all your time working on your assignments. Go to EduBirdie and let those nerds do it for you. And they had many, many, many YouTube stars doing that, and before they were managed to be told to stop and to bring those what are they called, entertainment commercials down, before they actually did, they had reached 750 million viewers. Yeah. And what that really was, that's such a huge concern on so many levels. It didn't really make it here in Australia. People didn't really notice it very much. I don't know why. I would have thought that would have been on the front page of the paper like My Master. But they were recruiting younger and younger YouTube stars, and they were reaching a younger and younger audience. And I'm thinking about my granddaughter who's 12, and those of us in the room with kids who are watching those YouTube videos, starting to see outsourcing your learning as what you do if you're not a nerd, if you want to have real fun. The 750 million people viewed that before it was taken down. And it will go on. And next year, when I give this presentation again, I'll probably have a second slide. But the point of the matter is there's just scandal after scandal over the last 3 years, which has made the issue of contract cheating really come to our attention. And you would have seen this sort of thing, I'm sure, around on your campus. These are examples of the various types of advertising, advertising the wares of contract cheating. This service is not just advertising its services to vulnerable students, in this case Chinese students who are struggling. They're also recruiting good students who are distinction and HD students to be ghostwriters. So they're recruiting, they're seducing our good students, and they're also seducing our vulnerable students. And that's a bit of a homegrown version, as is this one and this one, but very sophisticated services. You can see, you can go online here. You can enter how much you want to spend, the level. You can say, I want to get an HD, or I want to get just a P2 is all I want. I want to have an IELTS level of about 6 or 6.5. You can specify all those details, how soon you have to have the assignment, and so on. You can see these are services. ThinkSwap is a file sharing site which presents itself as note sharing, but then look at this, it still offers plagiarism-free writing service. Obviously, they don't know what plagiarism is. And then there's something like this, which you can see, Studiosity using our own branding at my university, the University of South Australia. We told them to cease and desist, so they made it blue. Yeah. Now, all of these really are trying to give you a sense of that students are being bombarded by these marketing savvy sites that are using everything at their disposal. Hard copy advertising, things slipped into letterboxes, in cafes, on lecture seats, on the backs of toilet doors, that's that sort of stuff, but also bombarding students in their social media accounts. And even we had ThinkSwap and Studiosity somehow hack into our system at UniSA, and I've heard it's happened at others, and actually directly email our students in particular courses, offering these services. And you can imagine, to somebody who's a vulnerable student, who's struggling in a second language, who's just arrived, has got their assignment due, they're freaking out, this looks like a legitimate service. And you start to go down a path you maybe never intended to go. Lots more I could say about that, but I know I only have half an hour. Let me see if it's going to work. Yes, it is. So just so we're all on the same page, traditionally in 2006, when the term contract cheating was first coined by Lancaster and Clark, they talked about contract cheating as being where money was exchanged, where you went online to a commercial provider, You entered into a contract, you said, I will pay you $100 or whatever, and you will provide me with an essay or an assignment. The sector and the literature and academic integrity is taking a broader view now. So this is how we've defined it in our project. It occurs when a student submits work that's been completed for them by a third party, irrespective of the third party's relationship with the student, whether they're paid or unpaid. So it could be that third party might be a friend or family member. It may be another student or even a staff member, and we've seen that as well. And it could be a commercial service. Now, why does that matter? It matters a lot in terms of how we perceive this issue. For us, whether money has been exchanged or not is not the issue, even though actually it does sort of hurt us in our souls to think that people are paying others to do their learning. The money exchange is not the issue. The issue is that the student is not achieving the learning outcomes and they're graduating with a degree which we have guaranteed to the employer that they have the skills and knowledge for. If you're outsourcing your learning, you're contracting it out to somebody else. And, it's not just family and friends have all sorts of benefits for doing the work for you. They do it out of love. They do it out of some idea of reciprocity or whatever. So money is not the issue. The issue is that the work has been outsourced. And that's how we've defined it. And that's how it tends to be defined in the literature now. So we needed to find out how prevalent it was. There was a whole bunch of, all this stuff about My Master and all these scandals that had happened, but no one had done any empirical work to find out just how prevalent it was. So that's what we set out to do with our OLT funding. That was the first question. And then we wanted to find out what students and staff had to say about it. So we did a survey of both of those groups. And then we wanted to find out about the context, what's actually influencing contract cheating behaviour. We were really interested to find out about the types of assessments that may or may not be associated with contract cheating. And the premise of the OLT, when they had commissioned this work, was they had this idea that authentic assessment would be the answer, the solution to this problem. This idea that if we as educators could just get our assessment in order, students wouldn't be able to outsource it. So that was our final question, is that the answer or not? Our group, our research group, started from the premise that we didn't think it was, but we would explore it. We think assessment's important. No matter what happens, don't leave the room thinking, I don't think assessment's important. It's very important, has a role to play, but we didn't think it would be the answer to the problem. We think it's much more complex than that. Just like other people have said, hey, the easy thing to do, if students are cheating, just tell them to be honest. And that will solve the problem. We've got to make students honest, or just punish them more. So we know, based on our previous research and all the work I've been doing since 2002 on this topic, these are very complex issues. There's not one simple answer. We actually did parallel staff and student surveys with 12 institutions. 8 of them were universities, and that's the data I'm going to be reporting today. We also got data from 4 non-university providers, but the answers, the responses are so different between those 2 groups, so we report them separately. The university data is the one that we've spent most of the time analysing. So you can see in the universities, over 14,000 students. It's actually over 15,000 in total, and 1,100 staff respondents. We also had a large data set of procurement requests, which you probably heard Kath talk about. The procurement requests are where you go online and contract out with a commercial provider. And Kath had found a way to actually start to go into those commercial providers and access all that information. So Kath had actually harvested 111,000 procurement requests, and then we analysed a sample of those, trying to look at the types of assessments that were contracted out to commercial providers. We also very kindly, 2 universities offered us their de-identified data from their academic integrity breach databases. And we could then analyse again and look at the types of assessments that students, where cases had been substantiated, the types of assessments that were being outsourced. So a lot of data. So we hypothesised, we conceptualised that there are 7 types of outsourcing behaviours. We're presenting it as a spectrum, but it's not quite a linear spectrum. These 2 behaviours, buying, selling and trading notes, may or may not end up fine. You might end up cheating when you engage in that behaviour, but students have been buying, selling and trading notes for a very long time. It's not necessarily cheating. Providing somebody else with a completed assignment for any reason. Again, it may lead to cheating, and we thought that it probably does, but it's not necessarily cheating, If I'm working with somebody and they've done the assignment last semester, I'm going to say, hey, do you mind showing me what's the structure like? And we certainly, you'll see the data, students tell us that they like to collaborate in this way and that they share a lot. It may lead to cheating, but we can say we're not sure if that's cheating. Whereas these 5, we're sure they're cheating. When a student obtains an assignment with the intention and then they submit it as their own, that is clearly cheating, right? When they provide or receive exam assistance through a whole range of different means, whether it's the old-fashioned way of putting notes on your thigh, putting your phone in the, above in the toilet and going and collecting it, or using high-tech devices where you have little earpieces, cameras on your glasses, and somebody else outside telling you the answers. Or you have a watch that looks like my old-fashioned analog watch, but actually it's a smart watch. Or you have a calculator that looks like it's a legitimate one, but in fact it's actually a computer. So there's lots of high-tech and low-tech ways to provide or receive exam assistance. Have a look online if you're interested in looking at how to cheat in an exam, high-tech, there's some fun stuff there. And obviously, exam impersonation. If you take an exam for somebody else or you get them to take your exam, that's the ultimate of contract cheating, we would say, right? Totally just giving it away. And especially when you think that, the other thing that there was this perceived wisdom in the literature and across the sector, that just do more exams. More invigilated exams will solve this problem. So we wanted to look at exam behaviour. Okay, so in a nutshell, I'm going to give you our 8 key findings. There are more. Do look at the papers, but this is the stuff I can give you in half an hour. But the very first thing we found, because remember we had some qualitative responses which we're still analysing, but the very first thing we've found is that contract cheating is a symptom, it's not the problem. So we've started analysing the qualitative data and already we've found that about 1/3 of staff described contract cheating as a systemic problem. They wanted to tell us this. So our free text question just said, is there anything else you'd like to tell us? We didn't ask anybody about the commercialised environment of higher ed. They told us. And they said they feel it's been created or made worse by government and institutional policy and practice. So there are 4 segments to this, and this is really the sector and the institution. And one staff member said, the upsurge in third-party cheating is due to students' perception of university degrees as a commercial transaction due to university management's focus on the business of education, such that marketing of university products becomes more important than the education process itself. We've had lots and lots and lots of comments like that. That's just one that exemplifies it. Students also had something to say about the fact that contract cheating is a symptom rather than the problem itself. They discussed systemic problems, and then they used those systemic problems to rationalise various types of cheating. As in this example, the student said again, very similar to the staff member, with education now a business and degrees sold as a product, there's less connection and understanding that university is about acquiring knowledge. It's a user pays system to get the degree. The degree will get the job or the visa, the job, it's about getting passes, getting through the process, and a little attachment to the ethics of, I would say, non-cheating. So both staff and students through the qualitative data have been really sharing that with us, and we're still processing that information, analysing it, and we promise we'll publish some papers on the qual data. On the quant data though, looking at those 7 outsourcing behaviours, the second finding is that students share their work a lot. Remember those 2 outsourcing behaviours, buying, selling and trading notes, or providing an assignment to somebody else. This is the number that's big. 27% said they'd provided somebody else with an assignment for any reason. 27%. So more than 1 in 4 of our students are sharing their assignments with others. And our qual data seems to be suggesting they're doing that because they really need to collaborate. They need an exemplar. They don't know how to do the assignment. They're worried. They're nervous. The problem is, of course, when you share an assignment with somebody else who's struggling, it's very tempting for them to take your work and submit it as their own. 15% said they bought, sold or traded notes. So that's a pretty high number too. But of those 5 clear cheating behaviours, only 6% said that engaged in 1 or more of those. So not a huge number in comparison to say that. Sharing is the thing. Now that 6% fits in pretty much with the rest of the literature. There's a recent survey done in the Czech Republic. They found 7%. Other colleagues have looked just at paid contract cheating and they say 3%. That's Curtis and Claire. We also, remember, we asked staff the same question. when you were a student, did you ever engage in any of these behaviours? And those who have seen this presentation before, please don't speak. Those who have not, what do you think the number is for staff remembering back to when they were students? What do you reckon? High? Higher than 6? Same? Higher? 10%. 10% of staff. Now remember, most of the staff are probably, you know, older than the students. Maybe not as old as me, but, you know, I don't know. But they're obviously older than students. They're remembering back to their time. So this idea that contract cheating is suddenly this new problem, which we're terribly worried about, is not so much the issue. It's been around for a long time where people have been outsourcing their work, parents, friends, former students, and so on. What is different, what is really qualitatively different, is these unscrupulous commercial cheat sites which target our vulnerable students. That's the big difference. We've seen a proliferation of those commercial sites. When I was a student, when I was an undergrad, if I had chosen to cheat, I didn't have that option, that's for sure. So remember, we thought that if you engage in sharing, it may lead to cheating. And in fact, our data showed that the cheating students, that's that 6%, were twice as likely as the non-cheating students to engage in those sharing behaviours. And they were more likely to pay money or use file sharing websites or professional services. That's in relation to buying, selling and trading notes. So we know, remember I showed you that poster before, it's a ThinkSwap, it's a file sharing site, but it also offers plagiarism free writing services. A lot of those file sharing sites actually are gateways. As you go in, they'll say, hey, listen, did you find those notes useful? Would you like some more help writing your assignment? Help. Yep, and that's actually what we found. But it's who you know rather than the commercial providers. So even though we remain concerned about file sharing websites and online cheating services, students are still primarily engaging in this behaviour with people they know. So it's current students, former students, friends and family. Why does that matter? It matters a lot because all the traditional tools we've been using for some time to identify plagiarism and cheating, we can still use. If we have heard people say, I can't identify contract cheating because it's going to be a bespoke essay written by a commercial provider. Most of the time, they're using other students' work or friends or family. Chances are it's in Eternity or a text matching software database. So still keep using the tools you have available to you. As I said, the descriptive stats I understand very well, and we looked at things like gender and discipline and language and study mode and domicile. We looked at all of those things, and you can read our papers to look at how that all pans out. But in fact, when Michael did the multivariate analysis, this is what he found. There are 3 things that contribute to contract cheating. And the first one, and this supports every bit of research which has been done over the last 2 decades in relation to academic integrity and to language and learning, it's speaking a language other than English as your main language. And some people had this idea that some students in particular cultural groups think that this isn't cheating because in my country it's okay. In fact, our data didn't show that. We also asked questions about the wrongness of certain behaviours, and there was no difference between international and domestic students, no difference between first language and second language students. The issue wasn't that they didn't think it's wrong, it's just that the students can't do the work. They're working in a second language, they don't have the linguistic capacity, and it's by far and away the number one, the biggest influence on contract cheating. The second largest influence is the perception that there are lots of opportunities to cheat. And we can do something about that as educators. We can really think about our assessment and think about why would students think there are opportunities. One example might be, we're not even looking at the Turnitin reports, or we're not even putting them through a text matching software, or we're using the same assessment semester after semester after semester. I saw somebody recently who had been using the same assessment for 5 years. And they disingenuously said, but I changed the name in the case study every time. So this semester it's Tracy, next semester it's Judy, next semester it's Sally. Yeah, okay. So, you know, students perceive their opportunities and that's when they'll actually engage in cheating. And this is an interesting one for what we've been talking about this morning and we'll talk about today and tomorrow. The third most influential factor was the students' dissatisfaction with the teaching and learning environment. their dissatisfaction with the teaching and learning environment, if they were disengaged, they didn't feel like the staff cared about them, if they didn't think the staff were approachable or the staff didn't explain the assessment appropriately, they're more likely to engage in contract cheating as well. So I think this finding here is particularly pertinent for today. So our fifth finding is that students actually aren't concerned about this. So looking at this little figure, this is the staff, the green. We asked them, how concerned are you about contract cheating in higher education? And you can see staff, moderately to extremely. Everyone in this room are like, oh, this is a big problem, we're worried, right? This is our cheating group. Well, slightly, maybe moderately. Slightly to moderately, very, very different to staff, right? They're not worried at all. Why would they be? They're cheating. And they're our non-cheating group, almost exactly the same as the cheating group. So our non-cheating students are not worried about it. They can see people around them cheating and they're like, well, you're an idiot. You know, that's just you. You're going to, you're the one that's going to suffer. You're the one that's not going to learn the knowledge. But we need to get our non-cheating students on board to understand this has ramifications for them. There's ramifications for the reputation of their university and the quality and the value of their degree. And they're going to be competing with these cheating students for the same jobs. The employer will not know who does and doesn't know the work because they're going to have the same parchment. And we're not talking to students about it. So this is various aspects of the teaching and learning environment. And you can see here, this is the least the students said that was happening. All these different things, opportunities to approach, explain academic integrity policy. We're doing a good job of that. These are all the other elements of the teaching and learning environment. You can read the paper and see. But here, look at this, and even staff agree. We're just not talking to students about and explaining why contract cheating is a particularly egregious breach. Talking about our policy, well, know about that. We talk to students about plagiarism, but we don't explain to them why contract cheating is a particular worry. Our sixth finding is that suspected cheating often goes unreported, and there are three reasons for that. There's the perception that it's impossible to prove. We've developed some resources which are going live this week about how to substantiate a contract cheating case. You're not proving it, you're substantiating it. Remember, we don't have to prove that they bought it because we don't care whether they bought it. We care that they did the work or not. Who are we, educators or police officers? We're educators. How are we going to determine if they outsourced it, if they didn't meet the learning objectives, if they can't actually speak to the assignment they did? That's clear evidence that they didn't do the work. Staff say it's too time-consuming, and it can be, for sure. It's a very time-consuming thing to substantiate a contract cheating case, but it matters a lot. And staff often don't feel encouraged to report because of the fact that it takes up so much resources. That is absolutely true as well. The problem is when staff do report it, the penalties are very lenient. So those who had reported it told us what the typical penalties were. And you can see for an outsourced assignment, only 3% of the time they're getting suspended. 3% of the time suspended, which is what we would recommend, and TEXA recommends a suspension for a major study period as a minimum. But look at this, 30% of the time they're getting a warning or counselling. 27% of the time, this doesn't add up, by the way, you can choose multiples. Yeah, just in case you're adding up. 0 for the assignment. Now, 0 for the assignment is no penalty at all because they didn't do the assignment, right? So there's got nothing to lose if they put in an assignment that they got from somebody else, and they may still pass the course because that's one assignment out of maybe 3. Even in exam impersonation, the most egregious breach we can think of, the most brazen, audacious cheating, only 16% of the time where they were suspended and 12% of the time excluded. So people not only are not supported very well to report these types of breaches, when they do, the outcomes are so lenient, people feel like, what's the point? So getting to our critical question, which is what the OLT wanted us to look at, authentic assessment. Is it good to do? Yes, it is. It really, really is. Because many students rationalize cheating when they thought the assessments were trivial or unimportant. And they justified their unauthorized learning practices because they said, hey, this is how it happens in the real world. And you can see here an engineering student said, the worst possible student would love to try hard and do design work. However, useless assignments like weekly quizzes are very unwelcome. And we've seen in our qualitative data that uninvigilated online quizzes for a few little marks here and there in some disciplines, particularly engineering, those are the ones that are outsourced the most. because the engineers justify it. They're just trivial. It doesn't matter. Or you can see here a student talking about, listen, you know, it's crappy assessment when you just ask us to memorize material because, you know, in the real world, we're going to have all these resources available, and they justify the way they do the assessment because that's what they'll do in the real world, So look, it is good to do. Authentic assessment is good to do, but it isn't a solution. So we identified 5 factors of authenticity based on the literature, and I can show you the coding later, or you can read our paper. And then we analysed that other data we had. So remember, we had 200 assignment orders, that procurement notices online, and we also had hundreds of assessments through 2 universities where students had been found to have breached. And what we found is authentic assessment is not the solution. So in the procurement data, assessment tasks with no, some, or all the authenticity factors, look at this, no authenticity factors, 1, 2, 3, even 4 and 5 are routinely ordered by students. It made no difference. And in fact, in one discipline, education, all the orders were for highly authentic tasks. Those were the factor of 5. And in the university breach data, the same pattern occurred. So again, assessments with no, some, or all of those 5 authenticity factors were outsourced by the students in the breach data. What we found through analysing that data is that paid contract cheating occurred most frequently in two disciplines, society and culture and business. Unpaid contract cheating was still the most prevalent form. So getting, again, that substantiated our quantitative analysis. It's friends, former students, family members. And it occurred at all levels. There is also a bit of a myth that it only happens with undergraduates in large classes. Undergrad and postgrad, virtually the same. So getting to the end here, our 8th finding is that there are, even though authentic assessment won't solve the problem, there are some assessments which are less likely to be outsourced. So look at this. We asked them about these various types of assessments. There had been some suggestion in the literature, and in fact, I was advised this myself by a very senior staff member, that all we had to do was give students less time to do the work, and then they wouldn't be able to outsource it. But in fact, our cheating and our non-cheating students said that's the most likely they're going to outsource it. We're going to actually force our non-cheating students to do that. So the other thing too is that heavily weighted assessments more likely to be outsourced. And how sad is this? You don't want to give them too little time. You don't want to weight it too heavily. So maybe we're going to work with continuous tasks to try to, you know, scaffold learning. That was the 3rd most likely to be outsourced by both groups. Now, we think about this. Why is that? Again, going back to that, it's too trivial. They're only worth a little bit. Maybe it's because if you have continuous assessment every week and you're doing 4 courses, that means every week you've got 4 things to do. And that goes back to this. You don't have enough time and you've got your major assessments to do. Yeah. And maybe you just have to focus on the major assessments. But these 4 here were the least likely to be outsourced. We were amazed, completed in class. Our cheating students, 20% of them said they could still outsource it in class, invigilated. We're like, how? Well, it can be done. Even our non-cheating students, about 8%, I think that number is, 10, I think. Hang on, no, this one, 8, said the same in class. So they must be seeing people cheating in class, so they know it can be done. Personalised and unique, that's on a very authentic task. For example, in finance, giving a unique data set. It might be about your particular personal experience. A viva, where you get the student to speak to a written task. Great if you've got a nice small class, not a tutorial of 40 students. And a reflection on the practicum, especially because the practicum has to be done by that person. I should say here, and I haven't mentioned it elsewhere, that in fact the largest proportion of that 6% of cheating was in exams. In exams. The largest proportion of the cheating happens in exams. And that makes sense here when you think often they're very heavily weighted. Okay. So what does it all mean? As I said right at the beginning, contract cheating is a very complex problem. It's systemic. The causes are not just one thing. It's not just because students are dishonest. It's not just because staff are not doing good assessments. It's very complex. We do now know those 3 factors: language, opportunities, dissatisfaction. They're the 3 big influencing factors on the behaviour. We can't just be blaming students or educators. It's a much bigger problem than that. The idea that we can come up with one thing like assessment design and job done. But we also know there are some things we can do. We now know that there are some assessments less likely to be outsourced. We now know that most of the behaviours are where students are sharing with one another. And from our qualitative data, we know that they're sharing because they need an exemplar. They need to see what that assignment looks like. They don't understand the assessment requirements. And we know that all of this is all very well, but both staff and students, their decisions are enabled and constrained by the institutional factors that they are working within. So I want to acknowledge our early analysts, Sadia Mahmood, plus of course the OLT. These are the two papers that give you much more detail than I've given you very quickly in the last half an hour in studies in higher ed. But as I said, you can just look up Bretag and Harper in studies in higher ed. And I'll just show you, I'll leave on the screen. Those are the 5 authenticity factors that we use based on the literature if you just wanted to check them. So I think I've left just a couple of minutes. I've taken you on a whirlwind tour through our data. There's so much to say, but very happy to answer any questions you may have. You must be so sick of hearing about this, sorry.
It's really good. Every time there's a moment, it's really good. This time around, it was seeing the bit about the assessments and marking an assessment as 0. Of course, the students will do it. So, you know,
why would we think a 0 is appropriate?
We really focused on that, and now it's 0 for the unit, and the word is getting out.
That's great.
And the students are. It's in one particular unit where a lot of them are change
in behaviour. That's great. I'd say, you know, a 0 for the unit's got to be the absolute bare minimum. I really vote for suspension because I think that word gets out really quickly then and people go, wow. And it doesn't have to be, you know, you're not excluded forever. And I think you've probably been in sessions where I've talked about this too. At UniSA, we've set up a mentoring scheme for suspended students. When they come back in and they have a buddy, they have to meet with their program advisor so they understand, they get sent to a learning advisor. So we can provide a scaffolded, supportive approach to people who are suspended. But a suspension is basically saying it takes 6 months off and think about what you're doing at this university. If you're, you know, you're so unengaged, you're going to outsource it. Yeah. Hard to know. Early days, you mean just I can only speak about my own university. It's hard to know. What I do know is that very few people take us up on our mentoring program. They come back, but they sort of slink back in. So we're like, we're here to help you. And they're just like, don't talk to me, don't talk to me. I don't know what the numbers are because, of course, they're not only being suspended for academic integrity, they might be being precluded for other reasons, yeah.
I'm from a university where I've been speaking to Tony a bit about their new
author investigation.
Yeah.
Yep.
What's your opinion on how that affects all of this?
I think it's potentially very useful. So I have trialled it for them. We're not piloting it at UniSA next semester as other people are, and I'll tell you why. My argument is we don't even use Turnitin to its full capacity, and now we're going to give staff another bit of software which is much more complicated and say use that. So I'd be happy if staff actually use Turnitin to start with. I think it's potentially very useful, but it has to be really supported. Staff need professional development. They need to understand how to read the report. The report that they have comes from all the information that myself and others like Kath have fed into Turnitin about how you substantiate a case. You look at the properties of the document, you look at the language style, you look at the different cut and paste, you know, plagiarism and where it links to. You look at the references. There's like 10 or so different criteria. They've fed all that into a bit of software, right down to linguistic style, even how you use capitalization and full stops and so on. I think it's potentially very useful. But there's no point buying more software unless our staff are using what they have and it's supported to use what they have. So that's why we haven't. But, you know, we won't be an early adopter. We'll wait for a couple of years. Once all the problems are ironed out, maybe we'll use it then. But no, I think it's actually very useful. Yeah. Hey, you must be sick of this, Jane.
But we're now using it as a really helpful way to scaffold that.
Oh,
and
that's nice.
We've got a learning advisor, a librarian, and an academic developer working with the staff who are taking up the adoption. and that's the platform that has IP address, all of these things, and we are
Contract cheating?
yes.
Fantastic. And what are you doing then when you identify it? Because that's the really big question, isn't it? Then suspension, expulsions. Yeah, and it depends on the severity. Expulsion's got to be on the table as well. More broadly. Yeah, it is resource intensive. I was just doing another presentation yesterday for another seminar, and I wish I had the quote right here, but I read this great paper recently. It was called the Fraud Triangle. I can't remember the authors' names off the top of my head. I can find it for you. But these authors said, universities need to aggressively commit resources to this issue. They use the word aggressively commit resources because it's not enough to talk about it. We have the hard data. We think we know quite a bit about this now. This is the largest data set in the world. And we're still analysing, we're still getting more insights, but there's no point having all these insights unless we really allocate resources to following through. And that means all of us.